Ever.
Oh, I guess you could just copy the link to your channel here. Let me see if I can.
Yeah. Okay, we are live now. We're gonna have a couple minutes of just dicking around with trying to get the video out there to people, but just give us a few moments. But if you are here and watching it after the live stream itself, greetings everyone. I'm the delicious and mythical GriffinMuffin, and with me today I have Cult of the Cyber Skull.
Greetings. How do you do? You're looking really dapper today, I might add.
This is like
I love the suit.
this is a part of the outfit I was gonna do for PAX last year, but it got cancelled because of lockdown. So I have the top half, but the bottom half is just jeans. Like I haven't got the yellow disco pants. They're very hard to find.
Well, if you're at home, you're being comfortable. Wear what you like. But,
Yeah.
Put on appearances for the world to gaze upon you.
Yeah. We do have Sam Blips joining us. I think he might just be a bit late. I might just send a message. But it is early for him. Like it's 11 a.m. here right now. What time is it over there for you? 7 or something?
7 p.m. on Friday, so I'm still in the past.
Yeah. I'll tell you what. It doesn't. It's
much
not
like
getting
the
any better.
particular
12 hours in the
faction,
future. It's not any better.
I'm still living in the past.
All right. I'll just send Sam a message quickly.
Yeah. Oh man. I also really like your background here. It's really nice. The art that you have on the stream.
Yeah, that was Bruno Nascimento. He does pretty much all the art regarding my channel, like the backgrounds, the avatars, a lot of that, like the main big pieces of art he does, and I'm really appreciative of all the things that he's made for me. Yeah, he's a good artist as well. Like I'm just always happy with anything he makes. It's just he rarely do I get something from him and I go, no, you really need to do this. It's not what I imagined and stuff. Like sometimes he gives things to me and I'm just like, oh, could you just zoom in a bit more, or like, oh, could you just change the color of the tie? Like that's usually the only things I have.
Right.
Yeah. So we're all here today because I've done 2 videos now on Disco Elysium, and I don't think I can do another video on it. So I thought I'd just kind of discuss it out loud. There's also even Novum talked to me about how oh, you missed out a lot on what you could have discussed and whatnot. And it's basically time. Like you understand this as well. Like when you make a video, you could go on for 2 or 3 hours about a particular game, but you also need to kind of guide the viewer through a story of what you're saying. You can't just go, oh, by the way, this other thing, and talk about the music for 20 minutes or whatever, and then go back to the main discussion.
I mean, some people can. I certainly can't. I am not a stream of consciousness sort of creator at all. Like, my videos are structured. They're basically essays that I break up into sections. They're written so that I can, like you said, lead from one section to another. And yeah, just the amount of time that goes into making them, and especially when you're doing something so in depth and kind of picking something apart and analyzing it, just I don't think there's a lot of people kind of realize just how tedious the script writing actually is for something like that, and the revisions, and then the getting someone else to look at it and wondering, does this make sense? Is my analysis on point? Am I missing the forest for the trees kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it just takes up a lot of, and then there's also the aspect of I don't want to speak for you, but this happens to me a lot. The question of, am I adding anything to the conversation? Not just me talking about this particular topic, but Disco Elysium. A lot of people have made videos about it. A lot of people have dissected it. A lot of people have analyzed it. What am I doing that is not rehashing what's already been said? Like, what am I kind of contributing to the discourse, as it were?
Yeah, exactly. I thought about that a lot as well, and I thought it's a lot. Do you have the video open, the stream open, by the way? I just want to see if I'm capturing your voice.
Yeah, I do, but I have it muted because then otherwise I'm going to hear a delayed echo.
Yeah.
When I talk.
No worries. Yeah, it should be all right. I can see the little thing going up and down whenever you're talking, so it should be fine.
Perfect. I did just unmute it, so I did hear myself.
Yeah.
So we're good.
Yeah, that's good. I'll try and get this shared as well. Share, here we go.
Yep.
Twitter.
I did retweet you. So at least somebody is out there who saw it. There you go.
There we go. Done it again.
Perfect.
Should be fine. All right. And also, I primarily see this as like a thing that people will join in. Like if they watch the 2 videos and then like, oh look, there's a discussion, they'll join this as like a final cap off of the whole experience, I reckon. Yeah. So, I mean, I have the video open in this little thing over here. But I guess we should just let it roll for a bit, and then if things come up, or if things I go, oh yeah, at this bit I wanted to say this or whatever, I'll chime in.
Sure.
For love, for Revachol.
I'll say right here that it took me like a solid week to decide what title cards I wanted. I was like thinking of like, I got like the background and I'm like, yeah, this is legit. And I thought like, maybe I should make like a poster for each section and have it like plastered on the wall. Like, you know, that would be kind of cool. But I realized that like making a poster for each of these things was going to be like very expensive. So I was just like, yeah, just make the wall and I'll just do like and this is actually like kind of a reference to like the game, because obviously Harry Dubois can paint the wall and put up like fuck the pigs and stuff like that. So I thought that was a neat little sort of thing to do.
That was definitely the vibe I got when I saw it, because I kind of felt like the graffiti. You know, like the section of Revachol you go into that's kind of obliterated and destroyed. It's obviously been ignored by everybody around. That's just kind of like what I felt looking at it. You know, it's just referencing the game, the world, and it's very thematically poignant.
Yeah, I thought, and when I said to him like, oh, I put the like star and antlers in and sunrise parabellum, because I just love those. I love the symbolism behind, like, it's so succinct as well. Like when you discover like the star and antlers, it's just like, oh yeah, like upside stars represent like a fall of order, and the antlers is to represent like, you know, a rise of nature. Like, it's poignant, simple, you know, and it's kind of, it's good that way.
In Disco Elysium, fascism doesn't really stray from what we know about it. Anyone who studied the rise of fascism in history class, read Fascism by Umberto Eco, or Origins of Totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt, are privy to what fascism actually is. A reactionary ideology to oppose modernity or other prominent political movements, or to address the frustrations of a forgotten class of society.
I think I even came to you at one point and I asked for like kind of advice on like, oh yeah, fascism, like what do you think it is and stuff like that. And I think from that statement was actually based off our discussion a little bit.
Yeah, I don't remember if that was if I directly told you that, but I think I remember you coming to me and we were kind of talking about it as an ideology. And ultimately, among its many flaws, but ultimately, its most heinous intellectual flaw is that it's empty. It's an empty ideology. It doesn't stand for anything in its own right. It's purely reactionary. And then so when you're dealing with such an idea and how horribly it has been wielded in history, it really interested me to see how that would be approached in the game. You know, like, it's not the first time that you've kind of dealt with political ideologies that are this extreme in video games, but considering the kind of game that Disco Elysium is, seeing how it affects the world and how your character responds to it interested me. And I was actually kind of blown away by the different facets that they put in. It wasn't just a simple totalitarian, give my soul to the state sort of interpretation, but then you had the advanced race theory that you get with Eraserhead. You had Renee's interpretation of Rashovian nationalism. You had the lorry driver, you know, who was just a racist. You know,
and a bit of an incel, actually.
I want my country back, kind of thing, and a bit of like definitely an incel.
Yeah.
But, no, yeah,
I think
it's well integrated.
I think for me, like,
from an academic point of view.
Yeah, I think for me, like, fascism in Disco Elysium and a little bit in the real world kind of has this. I think that's what they're kind of bringing up, is this idea that a lot of fascist way of thinking is kind of like an interwoven web. Like, you can start off in one place and be like, oh yeah, I'm a racist fuckhead or whatever, and then like move along and be like, all right, I believe in a lot of incel stuff, and then you move along a bit more and I'm like, well, I'm anti-science, and then you move along a bit more, I was like, well, I'm pro-nationalist, and then eventually you reach a point where like, yeah, I'm just full-on fascist now.
Yeah, but that's the thing, like, the fascists don't even see themselves as fascists.
No.
You know, there'll always be some kind of other subgroup, you know. I'm not a fascist, I'm just, you know, proud of my country, or I'm not a fascist, you know, I'm a traditionalist, or something like that. It's never that aspect, right? And I think, again, that just ties into the fact that fascism doesn't stand for anything on its own, you know. It's a counter argument. It always has been. Even if you look at historical fascism, like by Giovanni Gentile, who is probably, like, aside from Mussolini, like the most prominent thinker, and his work is basically saying what fascism isn't. Like, it's not we stand for this, it's this is the third way. We're not capitalists, we're not communists. This is what we do. Like, okay, but that's in response to these. Like, how do you derive to your, you know, Marx drew his ideology from historical materialism, right? Where do you derive yours from? Like, the fact that you're just not communists? It's, yeah.
Yeah, it's a reactionary thing. That's what we mean by reaction. But a lot of people, like, I've seen a lot of like discourse on, unfortunately, on Twitter and all this sort of stuff. Like, when you call like very right-leaning people reactionary, they go, well, of course I'm reacting. That's how life works. You react to things. It's like, no, it's reactionary is like there's nothing based. You have nothing to like base anything off of. You just react to things. And they're like, no, I still don't get it. And there's a lot of like self-blinding sort of like zealotry behind it. You know, it's an interesting thing.
Fascism follows very basic, almost primal.
And your first mistake was looking for discourse on Twitter.
I know.
The power of birthright, uphold tradition, and believe in the leader. It simply finds things that are different compared to the nostalgic recreation of their society or nation from days gone, and proclaims those lost aspects to be the undoing of their great nation. Once you have said enough nationalist pieces of dialogue, the endurance aspect of your consciousness will contact you. I found that quite appropriate, because in my opinion, fascism originates from some
like that
deep
section that we
pain.
just saw, and I'm on a bit of a delay
I was reading at the
versus
time
you, because I'm just kind of watching it on YouTube.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
But yeah, like what you just said there, that just pretty much encapsulated everything we talked about.
Yeah.
That kind of idealized, this is the world that I kind of I don't recognize the world anymore. I'm going to create this idealized notion of what the world should be like. And that's the ideology in a nutshell. Exactly.
And, you know, I don't, like, really interact with certain people like this, but, you know, I meet them and I know I've known them and stuff. And it's very much like when you meet people who are very traditionalist or border, like, crypto-fascists, like, there is a bit of, like, a lag in how they view the world. Like, they always refer to things from, like, decades ago. Like, oh, man, that was, like, the best thing ever. Like, they refer to a movie and they're like, that was the best movie ever. And it's like, and they like are obsessed with old memes and stuff like this. It's kind of, for me, that's kind of a signal of like, they are clinging to a world that once was. Like, that was the time they viewed the world to be perfect and everything. And then when they moved on from that, they just couldn't, they were stuck and they couldn't really move on. So yeah, I find, yeah.
They're stuck reminiscing about the good old days, but they're not able to cope with the good old days no longer being around. You know? Like, it's like the end of an era, and then there's that permanent sunset, and that's it. There's no sunrise coming tomorrow. When just this change is inevitable. Now, that being said, I sympathize, because I wish for a world where the 80s never died, and they continued going on to, you know, this day and time. You know, the fashion, the music, everything. It was wonderful. It was great, but we don't have that reality anymore, so I can only look at it nostalgically.
Yeah. And so the book that pops up in the bottom there is this one here, What Is to Be Done by Barry Jones. So he's he was a member of the Australian Labor Party in terms of he was like a science minister, and he got booted out eventually because he was a bit cantankerous. Like, he didn't get along with a lot of people and stuff, because he would often challenge people on a lot of things, and eventually he was ousted. But he's always been a bit of a polymath, and like he knows several like moderate amounts of information for a lot of things. And in this book, I like it in particular because, of course, you can get a lot of like lefty books and it's always centered on like the UK or the US, and it doesn't help much when you're like, oh yes, yeah, I know it's bad in the US, or I know it's bad in the UK, but what about Australia? So like this book was actually good because it talked about some of the main things about like the rise of the far right here in Australia is stuff like, you know, people like the Australian United Australia Party and all this sort of stuff that's coming up, who's backed by a wealthy mining magnate and all this sort of stuff. He talks about that and about how it was kind of because Australian politics became less about conviction and more about retail, like more trying to just win elections and gain power rather than actually trying to get things done.
Right.
Yeah.
So as a Canadian, I could definitely sympathize with you about looking up books on ideology and having a very Anglo-American slant on them.
Yeah.
But that being said, like, we have our own domestic presses, so it's not quite as bad. But yeah, like, you sort of need that domestic look and sort of analyzing what's happening within your own borders occasionally to see the symptoms of that's causing specific movements to arise, like in this case in the Australian context, you know. What has the average Australian unsettled and has them kind of clamoring for this different reality that's leading to the rise of their far right and what have you, your far right, what have you.
Yeah, because it's all different. That's the thing with like a lot of fascist stuff is like it adapts. It's very fuzzy and deals with what it has in that particular nation. Like, you know, that's why Umberto Eco always used that formula of ABCD of like, fascism is not ABCD. It's like sometimes it's just ACD, or it's like A, B, and D, or sometimes it might be A, B, and E. Like there's different aspects of it that will arise in the conditions that it comes up in.
Yeah, precisely. They have those like common branches, but it's how those branches apply to particular situations. It's not that dissimilar from like how Marxism is adapted to, say, you know, Maoist China. You know, why Maoism was developed in a Chinese context and why it wasn't just using Soviet-style Marxism or, you know, Marx-style Marxism. You know what I mean? Like, it's always that kind of adaptation circumstances that causes it to take part and spread, proliferate.
Definitely, yeah. Just want to double check something.
That causes it to...
Yeah, I just double checked. Yeah, your sound's fine. Good.
Perfect.
I think the only thing I want to say before moving forward, did you unlock the thing with the racist lorry driver about fascist magic?
No, I didn't. None of my playthroughs. No.
Yeah, so there's a bit where if you're like a proper fascist in the playthrough and you like do the red, which I'll talk about later, is the red check thing when you actually talk to all the traditionalists. There's a bit where he's like so despondent and he's like, I've tried everything, you know, I even tried this, and then Harry goes, did you try the magic? And he's like, yep, I tried the fascist magic, it still didn't work. I'm like, and I talked to my mate about this, I'm like, that's so crazy, fascist magic. And he was like, yeah, the Italian fascists actually practice magic. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, they were legit wizards. I'm like, what?
Does that tie into like Nazi occultism at all? Because like that was an entire, like, it's played up in the Indiana Jones movies, but there was like a fair amount of occultist influence in wings of the Nazi Party too.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure like Himmler would have just been like a giant like incel nerd in modern times. That's pretty much who he would have been. Because like he was actually like super interested in Norse mythology and he created the Thule Society. I mean, like occultism is actually pretty rampant amongst the fascist sort of way of thinking. I mean, one thing that I always refer to is stuff like the semen retention stuff. Like that's mentioned in this, which I did want to write about, but I was like, not sure if I can really bring myself to write about the powers of semen retention. It's just something I didn't know that was a threshold for me I didn't know I could cross.
You know, what, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Writing this script, the author cites scientific literature that suggests pain and the excessive use of opioids and alcohol are linked to voting for far-right political parties, which to me says that fascism does in fact stem from pain, be that physical or existential. The Thought Cabinet feature in Disco Elysium can be used to analyze how fascism is presented in the game. One core aspect of fascism is racial or ethnic hierarchy.
Yeah, and this is the part of the video that I strongly kind of agreed with about the
from the
it stems from
semiogenesis
pain.
known as
You know what I
measure.
mean? It's that
The conversation
that
you have
absence
with
of
him
something,
upon completing
that
thought
sense
is a
of
reference to
something's
fascists
wrong in
needing
my
an
life, something's wrong with the
empowering
world,
narrative
and I need to
fuel
find a
the
way
xenophobia
to kind of
and
make it
a
right,
sense of
or
racial
bring back
superiority,
that
a hero
thing that
narrative.
brings me
Race
joy.
theory
And you
is
gotta
never
have
about
this in the game too. Like, I remember my first playthrough, when I unlocked the thought that gave me the option to get the fascist, the fascist conceptualization, was you know who the real culprits are, the women, and they have the little umlaut over the O.
Woman.
The woman, yeah. And at the time, I was like kind of taking the game at face value, so I'm like, that's not what fascism is. This is stupid. Like, I just kind of thought it was a caricature. And then the more you play the game, you realize what they're doing. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, okay, you're just using the sort of patriarchal aspect of fascism as a stand-in for whatever target it is. But it's also funny writing. The women.
The woman. Brother.
Brother.
I love how they did that because it's I think like a lot of like, you know, fascism, that's the absurdity, you know, they're taking on that sort of like hyper masculine sort of theme behind fascism, because that's what a lot of like when you listen to like a lot of like fascist sort of people, they always are a little bit obsessed about masculinity. They always are obsessed with like, you know, we've lost masculinity, or, you know, stuff like that. They're always very sensitive to that subject. So to amp up like the sound of like brother and woman and stuff, like there's a bit of like oomph behind the things they say.
And just kind of showing off how cult fascism is, you know?
Exactly.
Observations grounded in scientific evidence, but something to lift certain peoples into a hero status. A social myth is a powerful thing in any ideology. You can also acquire the Revacholian nationhood thought by saying enough traditionalist dialogue choices. After activating the thought, every time you say a nationalist piece of dialogue, you actually lose morale. Losing morale every time you spout something fascist makes you consider putting more points into volition, which provides more points of morale for Harry, which to me is it's a commentary of how being fascist makes you emotionally hardened as an individual. At first, I thought it was the writers of the game punishing you for being a fascist. As I played through the other ideologies though, there are ways the game punishes you for picking either ultra-liberalism, moralism, or communism in different ways. So no, I don't think it's picking fascism out on its own. In fact, the thought does provide a huge buff when you drink alcohol. It is saying something, though, about the nature of fascism, that it is demoralizing. To feel alienated in a world that has changed to something you hate must be a horrible way to live your life. Now we have to move on to the vision quest associated with fascism.
So before we do the vision quest and stuff, I will say that when I did my fascist quest playthrough, like, I did get that. Do you know how you can go on a date with Lillian? I think her name is the net woman.
The walk on the beach and all that.
Yeah, I actually managed to unlock that in the fascist playthrough, which was interesting because it was, in terms of the story that was forming around Harry in that playthrough, like he actually successfully connected with like a woman and she wasn't scared off or anything, but she still like was a little bit distant and stuff. So it was kind of like very bittersweet for Harry. Like a lot of the text that came afterwards was like how, like, you know, love was still out of reach for him and all this sort of stuff. It was really brutal to be through. So that's why I went to that particular segment of the video and I was like, yeah, this bit, because you actually will have to walk home in the dark and she just gave you her sword and stuff.
And then that kind of sense of like, there's that hope, but it's still not going all the way. You're still not kind of getting necessarily what you want out of it. Or maybe you are. Like, it's a role-playing game, so you're kind of setting your own goals. But I think if you're looking at it from a particular perspective, where Harry might be looking for a replacement for his ex-wife, and that's not her, right? That's an evening that he can kind of forget about himself a little bit, but that's all that is. It's like a temporary reprieve. It's like doing drugs in the game or drinking alcohol. It's that temporary reprieve, which is exactly what he's been doing his entire life, drinking himself to death.
Yeah. I don't know if you knew this, but actually regarding the alcohol stuff, The game almost got banned here in Australia because it had like depictions of like consumptions of alcohol and drugs and stuff like this. And I actually wrote a letter to like the regulatory body, like an email, just a strongly worded email. It felt very impotent, but I still did it out of principle of like, what the fuck do you think you're doing? Like, this game actually is trying to communicate that like excessive alcohol consumption and drug abuse is like wrong and stuff like this. Right. It's like, it's a destructive feature for someone to undertake. And then only like a week later, we're like, okay, we fully understand now. It's not banned.
Right. No, I don't remember it. I'm sure maybe I read a glimmering of it, but knowing what I know about Australia, which is, not all that much, but knowing what I know, yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Yet another, video game that is on the chopping block there, but it's cool that you actually did write about it. That's the kind of like civic action, the civic engagement that we need.
Yeah.
For things like this, not just so much like get mad at publishers, boycott, blah blah. Like, actually, no, write your MPs, write your politicians, whatever.
Yeah.
If you're able to,
yeah,
turn that around.
Definitely. Yeah.
That's what the process is there for. And then here we have like a story of like a positive outcome for it. So that's awesome.
I'm sure me alone didn't do anything, because apparently on the Disco Elysium subreddit, like Australians were on there being like, "Yep, just follow this link, send an email and stuff." So it was a collaborative sort of thing to try and.
I know. Yeah. It's your show. Toot your own horn. Come on, like bask it up a little bit. You saved Disco Elysium.
I said yes. I alone saved it. Yeah. Oh yeah.
You heard it here, folks. GriffinMuffin is the reason that you Aussies can play Disco Elysium. You're welcome.
Before day 4 of the investigation to get the jamais vu thought. Firstly, to get this thought, you'll need to talk to...
I did have a whole section on the jamais vu thing as well, but I cut it because I'm like, not sure if it's relevant. But it was... I kind of regret not putting it in there, because it's interesting to have an entire thought that's about, realizing the world isn't the world you thought it was. Like, just to have that as a game feature, like, that's so strange to me. To like include that as a thing in a game, like a role-playing game, to be like, hey, your character is like having a moment of derealization. Like, yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's the idea that they're questioning everything that they've ever known, or that they're questioning their entire worldview, or just trying to... It's like the shattering of old ideas, or the shattering of whatever world you're comfortable with. And then sort of realizing that you don't have all the answers. It's powerful stuff when you think about it. And that's why you get such high rewards for it too. Like 1 experience for every time you click any orb, and all your intelligence learning caps are raised. It's sort of symbolizing coming into your own, and then just you're now an empty cup, and you're just trying to fill yourself with whatever you can after you've gotten rid of all your previous conceptions.
Exactly. Yeah. I think I wrote something to the effect of like, I think I only said what I said in the beginning was basically the segment, but again, it felt like a bit of a derailment, so I wanted to keep it on the track. So,
to Lena, the cryptozoologist's wife, about how you've lost all your memory, which will then lead you to talking to Joyce. You will need to have the thought jamais vu completed by the time you start your vision quest. Otherwise, you risk not being able to talk to Measurehead, which is a major portion of the vision quest. The final part of this quest can be intense. You will lose a total of 2 morale and 4 health to finish it. Be prepared. I don't think you can do a sober fascist run. Drink some booze just before you have to look yourself in the mirror. I hope those tips can help you get started. I'll now be discussing the quest itself. On the 4th day of the investigation, your endurance aspect will contact you.
You were right, brother.
Saying that you need to question other
saying, I don't think you can do a sober fascist run. And
you can't.
Just made me chuckle the first time too, based on everything you're building up to.
Absurdity. When you talk to Renee in the dialogue branch regarding your vision quest, you're met with this idea that the past is painful for him. He was devoted more to the suzerain than the budding love between Jean-Marie and himself. You can therefore interpret his rampant traditionalism as a coping mechanism for losing.
Yeah, and see, while we're here, like for Renee too, I liked Renee's character a lot just because it kind of showed that other side of fascism that's not like, the 20th century dictatorship, or that we all know, or the erosion of liberal the democratic rights or whatever. But it's that kind of old guard, the old nationalism, the old extreme loyalty to the nation state regardless of system or regardless of cost, because that is the right thing to do, you know. Like, you go to war the behest of king and country because that's what's expected out of you. And it's not, fascism per se, but it's just an aspect of it that's sort of idealized in fascist rhetoric. There's a reason that when Franco was in power, he never deposed of the Spanish monarchy. It was that kind of root of that traditionalism that you can wield to further your ideological beliefs. And so I thought the Renee character was interesting, kind of represented that. You have this system where this war is still, the fighters of that war are still alive. It's still within living memory, and he's living embodiment of it. Meanwhile, his best friend is a communist. So.
See, that's the thing that I find. I think what you're talking about in terms of how people are still living that have lived through the ideology and like the times and stuff like that is a very European thing. Like for someone like me in like Australia, where like, our country pretty much became a country in like 1901, and we've pretty much been a liberal democracy ever since. Like a lot of Europe has gone through like seesaws of different types of power, like power structures and ideological mainframes and stuff. So like an European writing this can have a lot of a better lens to be like, oh, this is how people would be feeling. Like, I watched this, I think Sam's friend Araxiel sent me this, but it's a guy who traveled to Estonia. And apparently in Estonia, there's like literally two halves. There's like the pro-capitalist side, which have like, they fared very well after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then those that are closer to Russia, who are still kind of, like he talks to a few of them and he's like, so how is it living in this town? It's pretty much a ghost town. Like, it's all this, like, classical architecture, like, all these Soviet buildings are all abandoned and stuff like this. And he asked them, like, oh, is it nice living here? And he's like, I love staying here. Like, when I first moved here, it was, like, the first time I could actually taste food and stuff like this, Like, communism back then for those people actually meant, like, hope. It meant, like, a change and stuff like this. So a lot of people are still living in that town, even though no one lives there, just because the very fact that they live there represents hope for them.
Yeah, and that's a very important point because, like, this is a game from Estonia. These are written by people who, very well, if they're our respective age, they would be remembering the first transitions from post-Soviet rule to their, the current democratically elected rule.
Yeah.
Right? That's what their childhood would be. For the people who've made this game, for, like, someone like me in Canada, Australia, like I said, we don't know that. We've just known our system since inception,
When was Canada founded as a country?
We asked the crown very nicely. Can we rule our own affairs in the Queen's home, or king, I guess, at that time? Okay, sure, why not?
Yeah.
1867.
Whoa.
Oh, greetings.
Hello, Sam. That was a good time to chime in. Hello. How you doing, man? Are you in the...
awake, I guess.
Yeah, that's cool, man. That's why I said in the chat, like, when I messaged you, like, I know it's really early for you, so if you're late, it's all good. But I appreciate that you've come here.
Is it late, though? It's at 11 a.m., and it's 10:30? 10:35 a.m.?
No, it was moved forward just a little bit. Just an hour.
Gotcha.
All good. All good, man. Yeah, so we're just going through the fascist bit of the video right now, and we've talked about a lot of things, and we're just going through the video that the ideological dissection one, and we're up to the vision quest part of it at the moment.
Gotcha.
No worries.
Talk to the fat lorry driver, another traditionalist. Something important is revealed when you succeed the red logic check with him. The lorry driver feels impotent in the struggle of finding someone who will find him attractive or a mate. He believes that just by existing as a man, he should just have a woman, but rationalizes his inability to compete with other men who he perceives as more virile and attractive than himself as the problem. This theme of genetic competition will come up again when we talk to Measurehead.
So yeah, incel.
Yeah.
It's like blatantly like, oh yeah, it's incel ideology.
One of the core dialogues in the
It's like
Vision
that.
Quest is
It's
the
like that
moment
part
when
in The
Measurehead deems you
Simpsons
worthy to
when
discuss
they're,
man to man
I think, what was
about
it,
the nature
voting
of
to change like the city council, and then comic book guy's on there, and he wants a Vulcan, basically the Vulcan reproductive cycle. And he makes the line of, we will now be able to only copulate every 7 years, which means a lot less sex for you and a lot more for me.
Which is like I felt I when I concluded with the fascist bit, as we'll see with like, you know, the genetic competition aspect of it, it was kind of like where I thought it was all going, because you had Rene, who again was like, you know, pining for the love that he lost, not just his nation, but like also like, you know, he lost the love of his life, like defending the nation, who just ended up marrying like his best friend. So there's a lot of like this, like, you know, losing loved ones and stuff like this, and like having to cope with that by devoting themselves to a cause. And there's also the connection of like how like incel ideology, like eventually people can get blackpilled and stuff like that. So that's where I saw a lot of this going. But yeah, we'll continue. Whoopsie doodles.
Time travel and women. In the conversation with Measurehead, the topic of sexuality is framed as a form of genetic competition, that winning the competition of sex and passing on your genes is to win the future. One thing that this conversation reminds me of is the philosophical underpinnings of somatic materialism.
So that's this book here.
The idea that most of what determines our lives stems from biological origins and our animal senses and needs. These experiences create what could be defined as the human spirit, and our needs for love and sex define our desires. Measurehead says that Harry losing the love of his life has left him crippled, that he uses this obsession with the past like heart medication to keep moving. He claims that the present is far more meaningful to pursue, that Harry should look forward rather than cling to the rotting corpse of the past. Within the context of the game, we can see how the writing leans into this new thesis behind fascism. To state my earlier thesis, that fascism is a reactionary ideology.
This is the interesting part too, because that's Measurehead saying that, right? He's saying look forward. He's saying like let go of the rotten corpse of the past. Meanwhile, his form of fascism, or his brand of fascism, is basically social Darwinism.
Yeah.
Not phonology. Phrenology.
Phrenology is the
Phrenology,
study of the skull
phrenology.
thing.
Yeah. Phrenology. Pseudosciences that have no bearing whatsoever on anything, really.
Yeah.
So that's
But
just an interesting takeaway.
I thought like an element of fascism was like kind of like this like looking forward into the future, like especially like the Italian form of fascism, like it was all about like speed and progress. So I mean, of course, like fascism is like very contradictory, like both like it just wants power, it's very like ideologically inconsistent. But yeah, I thought like fascism could also like have elements of like, you know, quote unquote progressivism, and yeah, that's why I thought like he could also be forward looking in terms of that instead of just being stuck in the past.
Right.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's contradictory. But like as any progress that is made is done so sort of reflecting the past. You know, it's always done in the name of capturing former glory, or banking on old institutions or ideas that should be preserved and should be maintained and used as the basis for whatever society is built on top of them. And I think that's like to say what to what you're speaking to.
Yeah. So like I would when we get up to the bit where I discuss like the main the thesis I've drawn, feel free to chime in. So
modernity or other prominent political movements, or to address the frustrations of a forgotten class of society. This new thesis the game proposes is that it is a reactionary ideology centered around the feeling of being outgunned in a society of sexual competition. At the end of
So yeah, like the way that I came to that conclusion, not like really based in the game, like when you translate it outside into the real world, sort of falls apart a little bit. But I think in Disco Elysium there is a lot of suggesting that like, yeah, fascism is about how, you know, men want to secure mates or like secure their future and their legacy, so they kind of appeal, like are forced to appeal to certain ideologies that will ensure that they will win the competition, basically, of sex, or to secure power and stuff like this. Is anyone there?
Yeah, sorry,
Oh,
still
yeah.
here. Just
No worries. Did you guys have anything to add or any objections or anything?
no to that, nothing.
Oh, no worries.
That's, I guess why I was so quiet. No, I think that you're more or less on that when you're talking about kind of the idea of sexual conquest as the reinforcement of I guess what makes a man, to put it somewhat crudely.
Yeah.
You know, something like this idea of masculinity and this idea of, you know, the hallmarks of a true man. And we were kind of talking about this well when we were discussing when we were sort of, oh shoot, now I just lost my train of thought.
I think we discussed that a lot.
Oh, my lord.
We discussed that a lot in the pre-show bit. We were just discussing like, oh yeah, you know,
Yeah.
like there's a lot of like, you know, a lot of modern day like conservatives and fascists and traditionalists and stuff always do appeal to masculinity a lot. Like, we think of the Gillette ad, like how many people got fucking butthurt over that thing. And like,
Yeah, that was.
it appeals to that sort of thing because it's like, no, that way of behaving is fine because that's how I define my masculinity, is how it caused such an uproar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, then that just kind of jogged like what we were talking about, where there was those calls of acting like it is to be a man, and this talk in fascism where you're talking about like the feminization of man, or softening of man, or, you know, the fact that we're moving away from that ideal masculine aspect. And sort of one way of looking at that is through sexual conquest, is what Eraserhead is basically talking about there.
Yeah.
And that book that you're talking about, the materialism.
Yeah.
Of the quest, Harry confronts himself in the mirror. Through a paroxysm of physical and emotional pain, he becomes the Icebreaker, a being so devoted to Revachol he, metaphorically speaking, shoots his own soul with a shotgun in a dark basement to emerge as an unbreakable being, devoid of humanity. In my previous narrative breakdown video, I referred to René Arnault and his traditionalist ways as a hindrance to his humanity, that he was never able to feel happy after the fall of the suzerain. The game treats the fascist vision quest of traveling to the past with such utter absurdity that people treat you like a lunatic. A lot of real-world traditionalists, conservatives, and other fascia do appear that way. I think not only in the game, but also in real life, that belittling these people as deranged lunatics doesn't do us any good. These people are in existential pain. While I don't agree with them or try to console them in any way, I think it's important to walk away with the idea that one day one of these people might become the Icebreaker, sacrificing their soul to a cause. And in doing so, they can bring untold harm and suffering to innocent people, all in the name of love.
One thing I gotta say is props to Billy. He helped me. Well, he made the music, and like we jived really well making the fascist track, because I'm like, oh, I want a heartbeat, because there's a lot of like discussion of like endurance and like physical stuff. So I want there to be a heartbeat. So like make like a drum kick for like a heartbeat. And he's like, oh, this works really well, yeah. And like he did the guitar bits, like, because I'm like, I want it mellow, but I want it to like kind of have not too depressing. And he's like,
Right.
yeah, I think I could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So props to him for that. I really appreciate it.
A man of the free market. The ultra-liberalism ideology is coding for the real-world ideology of free market fundamentalism or neoliberalism, an ideology that has been
I had such a hard time writing the ultra-liberalism part of this script. It was so hard to define. Actually, moralism was a little bit harder, which we'll get to, but the ultra-liberal stuff for me was like the most difficult in terms of...
The way that I interpreted ultraliberalism in the game wasn't so much like, yeah, there's that kind of adherence to free market capitalism, but like the radical fundamentalist understanding of free market capitalism. I think like you described it as anarcho-capitalist,
Yeah.
at some point, and that's just that kind of adaptation to it, where it's the constant hustle. It's everything for $1. You know, it's constantly trying to find ways to like rub two coins together and like make something happen out of it. To the point where that becomes like your defining trait. It's 80s greed boiled into the most like deregulatory outlook possible. Extreme free market freebooting, I guess.
Yeah. And that's why I think I'll say right now that, like, I wish I used the term anarcho-capitalist a bit more. I use the term neoliberalism to describe it to real-world coding, like neoliberalism, but just a little bit too much. Like, of course, like, neoliberalism has free market fundamentalist ideology throughout it, but I wish I could go back and just replace, like, just be like, da-da-da-da-da, anarcho-capitalist, da-da-da-da-da, anarcho-capitalist. Like, I feel like this appeals to that a bit more. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely have that sense too. But yeah, I agree. This would be a little harder to define because unlike fascism and communism, which are a lot easier, I suppose, it's just such a wide net to talk about ultra-liberalism and how it adapts to a game like Disco.
Yeah. So in the interest of time, what I'm going to do is I'll play certain segments of this video, and I might just do like the intro and then like skip to the thesis and stuff like that.
Nascent across most of the 20th century to really come into form during the late 1980s. You can also interpret ultraliberalism as anarcho-capitalism. In either case, they are cousins of the ideology of liberalism. Anarcho-capitalism and neoliberalism, however, share a core tenet that the exchange between people in societies can be reduced to purely economic and values the self-interested drives of individuals. This then reifies as the free market, power of the individual, social Darwinism, and a de-emphasis on monetary and fiscal policies in democratic governments.
And the definition that you just gave there, I feel that that was exactly the correct one in how Disco approaches it.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I will say at the front that, like, while writing the ultra-liberal, like, section of the video, like, there was a lot of times where I editorialized, like, I inserted my own stuff to be like, I hate this sort of stuff and whatnot, and, like, throw in little stories and all this whatnot, but, like, at the end of the script, I was just kind of like, look, this section where you talk about millionaires, like, it's not about the game, it's just your thing that you don't like. I'm like, well, yeah, I want to talk about the game. So I'd cut it out.
No. Well, good on you for recognizing it.
The big thing they go on about.
Don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to editorialize, but considering the scope of this video, I think that probably would have distracted a little bit from what you're trying to say.
Because lately when I make my videos, I tend to have like kind of like rules. Like I go, okay, I have to like with an ideological dissection of the game, I wanted to discuss the ideologies in that game. Yeah, of course you're going to call on real-world experiences, but like I wanted to glean everything from the text. I didn't want to go, okay, so the stuff from the real world that is influencing this game, I wanted to be like, let's take everything out of the game and unpack it, basically, so.
Is taxes. Once you say enough free market fundamentalist pieces of dialogue, the aspect of your psyche known as savoir-faire, good old savvy, will contact you, telling you that even through all your hard work with your feet on the pavement, on the verge of a mental breakdown, you're still poor as fuck, because the government is taking your hard-earned money with taxes. This is why Harry is so pornographically poor. But something slips through. Savvy says, don't worry, follow me, and I'll win her back. More on this later. Once adopting the ideology,
this is where that sort of liberal or libertarianism part of the ultra-liberalism comes in.
Yeah.
Taxes, man.
Taxes. Fucking taxes. Let's just get on a boat, go in the middle of nowhere, and then have to sell it for scrap. Do you know about that?
Taxes. No, I didn't know. What are you referencing?
I'm talking about the Bitcoin boat, the Satoshi, that happened last year.
I did not hear about this.
It's a good story. Look it up. There's a good Guardian article on it about how like a bunch of like Bitcoin millionaires were like sick of paying taxes and all this sort of stuff. And to be fair, there is actually like a large seasteading movement that's been happening over the last 15 years or so. So people who want to live out in the ocean. So like, you know, they're into that. And like, it was like backed by people like Peter Thiel and stuff like this as well, where eventually, like, these people were like, you know what? We're just going to buy a yacht, and we're going to put the rooms out. People buy them with Bitcoin and stuff like this. But it was an absolute catastrophe. Like, no one could own microwaves. You couldn't bring animals onto the boat. There was also, like, one kitchen, like a communal kitchen, and, like, no more than one person could be in there at a time. There was no discussion of, like, how to manage human waste. There was no discussion of where to refuel because, you know, yachts have engines. And it just collapsed within months. And eventually they just had to, like, sell it to some Indian scrapyard.
Who knew if you get a whole bunch of people who highly invest into this currency that isn't actually acting like a currency, but is acting more of like a gold hoard that you kind of sit on to flaunt your wealth with, without any regulation, cannot really come to a consensus about how to properly run such a venture.
And there's also...
Why does that sound like it's the next internet historian video waiting to be made?
I know, right? I know. And there's like stuff of like in like the little rules of like how you can enter the Satoshi, there was like, oh yeah, you could bring your own like Bitcoin rig, and like, you know, you could bring all that on board, but no, you can't have microwaves because they're a fire risk.
Because they're fire risk. Oh my lord.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's hilarious.
Outstanding.
First off, I didn't need to learn a new thought. It'd say maybe 50 reals saved up, but if you coordinate your thought ranting about the spectral hand...
Yeah, so this is the actual vision quest, so this is where we can lead into it.
Market and economic self-interest won't make you rich all on its own, and then it's time to reel in the big bucks. They suggest getting into local art scene. You visit
I'm skipping that a little bit at the end, but when you're at the end, when you're talking about expanding your brand, I think that's just like the ultimate. I think that's the perfect summation of what a vision quest about ultra national or ultra liberalism is about. Is
expanding your
brand, like your imagined value or your perceived value or how you can further sell yourself.
Because that's like a core thing behind free market fundamentalism is just this kind of appeal to this idea that like you are something to be sold, like everything is economized, like every single thing we do under this ideology is just economic. Like if you want to go hand out soup, if you want to hand out soup to the elderly, you're doing that because it creates a good brand image. It's all like there's no sense of like, oh, I'm just doing it because it makes me feel good. It's like no, you're doing it for some sort of economic sort of value tag to you as a person.
Well, you mean like companies who put the gay pride flag at the beginning in their avatars for the duration of a month, but as soon as the month is over, they're completely down? Or if they happen to be running particular brand accounts in Russia and Saudi Arabia and anywhere else in the Middle East, they don't do that? Yeah. Exactly
a
like
bit
that.
like that, yeah.
Remember, corporations are not your friend. Nintendo is not your friend.
Plastic which she sneezed holding her brush one time. In this part of the quest, there are subtle jabs at wealthy people who collect art. That art is not appreciated for its own sake, that it's a proxy for seeking validation for the hordes of money you have. Hanging a $10,000 piece of art on the wall is more tasteful than just sellotaping all that money to the wall itself. After this, your consciousness chimes in and says to walk around until you can hear a wealthy individual nearby. This will lead you to the mega rich lightbending guy in the shipping container. If you've had issues getting in here previously, Savvy will help lower the difficulty of the check. The point here is to convince the mega rich lightbending guy to purchase the art you bought from Cindy at a profit. This whole interaction plays on the idea that the rich
I actually managed to get everything out of this conversation with the mega rich guy, and that handout he gives you that you're supposed to invest just kept me afloat. And I thought that was like the weirdest thing until you start thinking about like the fact that he's ultra wealthy and he's so detached from reality, like he needs something to do with time, like Bezos going to space kind of thing.
I think this is like a very deliberate take on that sort of thing. Like the reality around wealthy people is literally distorted. Like in this time, like they've done a thing where it's like, oh yeah, light bends around him because he's got so much money. And I think that's like a kind of a tongue-in-cheek sort of thing of like, oh yeah, because wealthy people are so just detached from like actual living,
Yeah, like their worldview is so radically different. Like they just live on a completely different plane of understanding.
Exactly.
so
Like, to
disconnected from
them,
the suffering
stop
of the
being
working
poor is a
class
legitimate
that they
argument.
seek to commiserate with at a healthy distance. However, the mega rich lightbending guy doesn't actually give you money. Instead, he gives you a stock certificate of considerable net worth, making you a net-worthy individual. The game hints every now and then, though, how net worth doesn't mean anything to people in Martinez. You can't buy anything with it, people don't acknowledge you for it. All it really does is just add a bunch of numbers in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Your next phase of the quest is to find a brand manager to expend the value of your net worth. Your search leads you to Idiot Doom Spiral, who does a pro bono job for you to do a public art installation, to spread the word of the man, the brand, Tequila Sunset. Once he does it, you actually have to wait until after the Mercenary Tribunal until the piece is unveiled, and it's actually quite funny. The statue of King Philippe III is covered in parking fines, saying that the vehicle has been parked here for too long and will be towed. This high-concept piece of Idiot Doom Spirals is a satirical piece of how the old ideologies don't have a place in the modern world anymore. In the final part of the quest, Kim asks you why you did all of this. In your available responses, you can say that this wasn't what you intended, or that you did this because the free market willed it, that you wanted to better yourself, and even that you were just bored. But most of the dialogue options funnel into a final, decisive choice, to comment if this was all worth it. And with every choice, I found there was never this sense of achievement. It's just done. I was left feeling that this pursuit of wealth and recognition was kind of pointless. I made Kim laugh, and I got her drunk down on his luck to get back involved with the community again and support the local art scene. I didn't feel that this was a direct effect of being a hustler or a net-worthy individual, though. People who aren't hustlers can still motivate others to create and do amazing things. Afterwards, it got me thinking about neoliberalism and anarcho-capitalism and what it's really all about. And to me, it's all about recognition, that you're here and that you have existed. Congratulations, you did it. The bullies in high school have nothing on you now. You can buy 3 yachts, launch yourself into outer space and buy Lamborghinis on a whim, and it only makes you feel good. It all seems very narcissistic, because at the end of the day, you can't control...
That was like the only bit I decided to kind of put my personal sort of stuff into. It was like, yeah, it all feels really narcissistic.
Oh yeah, I mean, but I think after you've analyzed the quest, it's a fair point to bring up, because it doesn't quite have the same... now I haven't played this Vision Quest, but it doesn't quite have the same kind of conclusion, or the same feeling in the conclusion that the others do, based on what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because the others sort of have this kind of defining moment that brings the ideology to life.
Mm-hmm.
And here you just kind of have this high art conceptual piece that defaces the statue in the middle of town.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think this is
the connection between the political ideologies and Harry's X-something. During this playthrough, I finally unlocked the dream where you see Harry's X-something Dora on Voyager Road. This is a replay of the memory of the last time Harry saw her. In it, as he pleads for her to stay, he says, "But I'm rich now," to try and win her back. Remember how Savvy slipped up earlier and said, "Let's win her back"? In the Fascist Quest 2, there's a line about winning her back. Was it Revachol, or was it about Dora? Could the adoption of these ideologies in Disco Elysium be coping mechanisms for Harry? Maybe it's easier to blame the foreigners or taxes, rather than accept that the love of his life left him and started a family with another man. With that, it makes me think, what could moralism and communism do to win her back?
So that's like, it was really when I played the ultra liberal playthrough where I was like, hey, is this like kind of making this meta thing saying like ideologies are merely like coping mechanisms and stuff like that? And I don't know. Yeah, I thought it was like a
Pretty
real...
much.
Yeah.
Because like none of the ideologies have any kind of effect on the game or how you approach it, or pretty much like anything. It doesn't influence the conclusion at all.
No.
It's basically, it's flavoring essentially, to make the world feel more alive, to make it feel like like an actual failed state living in this limbo, being propped up by a foreign regime.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we'll come up to the moralism bit, which I feel is a bit more meaty in terms of discussion, because obviously it's like It's the closest thing that we get to as discussion of like real world sort of like current political sort of ideology, like liberalism and stuff. So,
and I will say, when I was watching this video, this is the part of it that I kind of took the most issue with, and I don't even mean that in a negative, you're wrong kind of way. But I think that there was like aspects of your analysis that I definitely want to discuss a little bit.
Yeah, sure. We'll go through the definition and stuff, and then skip to the Vision Quest itself. Like the bit where you talk to Warship Archer and stuff. You just waking up, Sam?
Yeah,
If there is
Cool.
change,
fine.
it
I'm
is
still
gradual,
listening.
No worries.
violent, and benefits everyone rather than specific classes. In Revachol, the current mode of government installed is a radical centrist one known as the Moralist International, also known as the Moral Intern. The Moral Intern were responsible for the downfall of the Commune of Revachol, with a swift and brutal military campaign known as Operation Deathblow. They even used the pre-existing communist Insulindian Citizens Militia and reformed it into the Revachol Citizens Militia, the police organization Harry works for. From the formation of the RCM and Operation Deathblow, it would seem that moralist governments are quite violent and oppressive. However, they actually only use violence to achieve a quote-unquote peace. Seeing as the center has to appeal to both sides of the fence, they believe in social liberation but also support the continuation of capitalism. But their interests and aims seem vague. From talking to an actual moral intern bureaucrat in the game, you can discover that social equality is definitely a part of their agenda, as they believe in democracy, and they definitely believe in a government-regulated capitalist economy similar to real-world Keynesian economics, but to a greater extent. This is based on the conversation with the same bureaucrat of the moral intern, who was a part of the committee of the Preisstabilité, controlling inflation to prevent radical economic events to ensure there is no social unrest. The ideology of moralism doesn't have a carbon copy in our own world, for comparison, although I think even most people can notice the cheeky references to liberals, with how most moralist dialogue choices refer to taking a non-stance on most issues. Directly comparing real-world centrism,
So
radical
here, where you
centrism,
say it
or
doesn't have a carbon copy in our own world, moralism, this is where I kind of started disagreeing with you, because everything up to that point, yeah, you are correct in its portrayal, and you do come around and touch upon it in your conclusion a little bit, but you don't focus on it. And the carbon copy in the real world is the status quo. It is the maintenance of order as you know it in a real world setting.
Yeah.
Like what you're talking about, maintaining prices to avoid any social upheaval. We want to maintain our liberal democratic focus. These are our lofty aims. It is just the perpetuation of the nation state as we know it, as it has been generations in the past, and as we want to maintain it going forward. And that's why it's depicted as the center position in the game, is because it doesn't lean any further right or left than it needs to in order to just appease the masses and keep itself alive. And that's why I think it's tied in so closely with something. You showed imagery of it, but you never mentioned this, but Dolores Day. Right? You kind of talk about her as the central figure in it, but you don't mention that she's actually the Christ figure. She's the stand-in for Christ and the role that Christianity plays in the Western world. Moralism is essentially the Nietzschean perception of the Western world, Western morality, and how the Western powers built themselves up on this notion of moral Christendom and how that influenced day-to-day life. And so going to like the whole God is dead aspect of it is talking about, well, we've removed so much Christianity from our lives, like what are we going to replace it with? And that sort of became politics, like the perpetuation of liberal democracy and our personal freedoms and etc. And that's what I feel moralism encapsulates in Disco Elysium. It is the extreme status quo. It is the adherence to the status quo.
Yeah, I'll say, like, I didn't, it's not like I didn't see it as in, like, you know, obviously I could tell, like, the parallels of, like, Dolores Day and, like, religion. I guess I just I didn't see it. Not as more as a fault. Like, I just didn't see it. Not a thing of, it's not existent. It's just,
Right.
I just didn't see it. But I see it now, like, very strongly. And, like, There was some bits where, like, I refer to Dolores Day later as like an Ubermensch of parliamentarianism, because I knew there was Nietzschean stuff like in Dolores Day as a representation, as a character and stuff, but I guess I wasn't really able to recognize how entrenched she is into a Nietzschean worldview, and also like to the idea of moral Christendom, as you discussed. Like, yeah, I guess so. And there was a bit where there is a bit where I discuss the music that I've excised from the video. Now, the music in particular I found to be very interesting in terms of moralism, because when you contact Warship Archer, which we'll just zoom to in a second, but when you contact Warship Archer, the music in it, which is called Adverse Parasite, I think it's called. It's on YouTube, you can listen to it. And the sort of music, it's like a synthy choir is the only thing I can describe it as. There's this like level of power, but there's also this call to like this kind of electronic sense of heaven. And it's like the perfect medley between like this sort of like technocratic worship, but also this divine nature to letting people run our lives. So and I did have that in the script, and I was like, I wanted to discuss more about the relationship between religion, state, and God, but I'm like, if I did that, it would be an extra 20 minutes long. So I had to excise it. But I think you have pointed out something very good. I was going to call you Shala, but you rebranded.
Shala's fine.
Yeah. That you point out something that it's just an addendum basically. So if I ever do make like a redux, I definitely would revisit it.
Yeah, that was just kind of like what stood out to me, and it was actually, you brought it up, like the mentioning of her as an Uber. Like, people don't gravitate to try to emulate Doris Day. They just sort of try to adhere to her teachings. And then there's even, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, like a book or something you find in there that talks about her giving up her husband or something. And becoming the embodiment for like the New Order. I could be mistaking that, but I think I remember reading about that in the game.
Yeah, there is a big book on Dolores Day. There's like an actual questionnaire that you follow, and it's like you have to answer it all correctly, otherwise you lose morale or something.
Yeah, exactly. It was that kind of quiz thing. And then now for a second, as I was talking about it, I was just wondering, like, am I confusing that with like the thing in Dragon Age, when you have to like figure out all the important people in Drostae's life? But like, if you want to talk about another Christ figure, but
yeah, true.
Yeah.
So we'll just go through the Vision Quest and its main points and stuff, and then we'll move on to communism.
Of the primary aerostatic aircraft above Revachol, known as
Not
the
of the
Warship
moral,
Archer.
not of
You
the
will need to
moral,
befriend either sooner
the
or
moral
later
center has
to
anything
be
to say
your
about
regular
it.
technician throughout this part of the quest. Once you establish contact, depending on if you're able to adjust their antennae properly or just fucking break it like I did, you can talk directly to the moral intern officials, or at least an intermediate.
I succeeded once to not break it. All the other times I try to do this playthrough and get like that bit so I can talk to Warship Archer longer, it was only one time. Every time I fucking broke it.
What's the role they have to make in that?
Interfacing.
Interfacing.
So in this playthrough, I had really high empathy, almost like no, if I remember correctly, like next to nothing physical. No, that was ultra liberal. I had really low intelligence, that's intellect, but I had reasonably okay, motorics, average sort of physical stuff, but really high, psyche.
Intermediary member of the
So you're
Committee of
basically playing like
Responsibility
an
of Revachol.
intellectual.
This is where
an intellectual
I
run.
want to elaborate more on this idea that moralism is romantic, deeply so. During the final part of the quest, you can ask the radio operator aboard the warship Archer about the nature of the moral intern. They say that they want humanity to endure, that they are the inheritors of Dolores Day's legacy, to preserve what was built by our forebears, and they want to continue Dolores Day's project of human betterment. Before we go on, I'll need to explain who Dolores Day was. Dolores Day is responsible for the DeLorean era, which is akin to the real-world Enlightenment era that gave the world the idea of colonialism and social liberty. And the innocence known as Dolores Day is seen as an Ubermensch of social liberalism and parliamentarianism. But it's more than that. People generally, even non-moralists, view Dolores Day as the most terrifying and most beautiful human being to have ever existed. She is, after all, the innocence responsible for the modern era. Harry's consciousness often comments on how beautiful she was, so much so that when you have the dream on Voyager Road, his psyche interprets the beauty of his ex-something as Dolores Day. There's one important piece of dialogue from Warship Archer that is really the ideological foundation of the Moral Intern, and it's twofold. To buy humanity enough time to achieve a democratic utopia and also protect the process from interference by any means necessary. That the idea of the state is to de-escalate conflicts for the safety of its people, no matter the cost. The state is, after all, a living thing that wants to survive and grow. One interpretation of this could be similar to how the writers posit a new thesis for fascism, is that liberalism is no longer about the continuation of human liberties and freedom, but has become the maintenance of the state. Throughout this essay, I've discussed the idea that ideology has become a coping mechanism for Harry's existential crisis, but also dealing with the heartbreak of losing his ex-something, Dora. In the Voyager Road dream on the islet, Harry even says to her that he's now taken responsibility and has become so fucking normal right now that everything is fine and she can come back. She even admits that this whole moralist thing doesn't sound like it's been done in good faith, but rather as a tool to win her back. In this case, moralism is something for Harry to believe in, to believe that he can get out of the hell that is his life.
Which is where I think a lot of the like the religious aspect of that you're discussing may actually be like proliferating here, because religion to a lot of philosophers like Nietzsche and stuff like this was used as a thing of something that held back a lot of things, So Harry's kind of appealing himself to moralism as a thing of everything will be fine if I just believe that like the technocrats will sort my life out and that Dolores Day had the right idea and all this sort of stuff. It's kind of yeah. I can see that a lot more now. Yeah, that
sort of like stood out to me exactly because you're replacing, and like going back to the whole Nietzschean element of it, you're now replacing faith in God with faith in the state or faith in the system or faith in like the institutions that we developed. So I feel that that's much more poignant in Disco because of what that moral center represents in the game. It's not purely centrism per se, but it is just trying to encapsulate or basically do what modern politicians do, is do the bare minimum in order to keep the system going. Right?
Yeah, which is
I don't
why
even mean that necessarily a cynical aspect of it, but when you think about it, the system works because nothing truly revolutionary takes place.
Exactly.
Right? And if something big happens, it makes waves, it sends shocks, and then you have immediate responses, things back. Like, here, carbon taxes has been a big deal for the last like few years, and drama surrounding that, or Obamacare back, in what was it, 2010, 2011 when that passed?
Yeah,
I think 20.
Yeah, it's always like the little things they're trying to do, but and then they kind of herald it as like, look, we made progress, and it's like, yeah, like the main things there that we need to get fixed are still left unchecked.
Exactly.
And it reminds me of a lot, like when you contact Warship Archer, like if you succeed in keeping the antennae correct, you can ask all the questions. So I asked all of them at that point. I didn't record it though. Actually, some of it corrupted. The footage corrupted because I changed it, because I was actually changing over computers at the time. So I forgot to change over the MK. It was an MKV file, not an MP4. So I couldn't use it in Adobe. So that corrupted and I couldn't use it. But there are parts where she discusses how, like, a lot of democracy, like, you ask her, like, how long do you think true democracy will be achieved? How long until it's achieved? And she goes, roughly 2,000 years. And it's like, oh, wow. Like, to achieve, actual democracy, according to this government organization, it will take thousands of years.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Because just of the glacial pace that it takes, because, again, its aim is to not rock the boat one way or another.
In a paradox, in the eyes of the idea of democracy for nearly 40 years, because it's never been about the center, about democracy or peace. The Moral Intern government can only exist because of the power given to them via the status quo. They are trapped in a paradox. In the eyes of the coalition and its Moral Intern, The mob cannot be trusted. The mob is a Leviathan. And until the day when the moral intern feels their hand won't be bitten back by the Leviathan, Revachol will have to wait.
So here, when you're
It's
talking
freedom.
about the mob camp being trusted, that's only in Revachol, and that's only because it's an occupied zone.
Yeah.
Now, we don't have enough information for the rest of the moral intern, but I feel that that's speaking to sort of like not even neo-colonialism, but any time that a Western power occupies a lesser state or some other area of the world in the means of trying to maintain stability, it's that kind of aspect of it where, and it's any transitional phase from one regime. And in the case of Disco, it's just that transition has lasted for like 20, 30 years or whatever the case is.
Yeah. I really only applied it to Revachol in that. Oh, not Revachol, but really Martinez in that sense. And like, yeah, it was a little bit it was a conclusion, so I kind of, really painted broad strokes for it. But yeah, like I kind of saw like, I guess it was because I was reading a lot of I was reading this book at the time. So I was being firmly kind of in my face. I was reading a lot about Hobbes and a lot about Jacques Rousseau and stuff like that. So I guess that was on my mind when I was reviewing this, and I'm like, oh yeah, like the Leviathan, like this big unruly mob, and the only way they can contain it is to, apply certain rules and stuff and to keep them under control.
I don't even disagree with the take either. Just kind of pointing that out.
From failure,
That-
course.
I feel that it's a very specific
the ideology
implementation
of
into that area of the game.
communism in Disco Elysium is something that really makes this game memorable. Typically speaking, communism in most mainstream games is used as a stand-in for some authoritarian ideology. But in Disco Elysium, there is more of an appeal to what communism is actually about: historical materialism. From this analysis comes a grand narrative of class warfare between the working class.
I think here we can also point out, like, how we discussed in the fascism part about how, like, you have, like, particular facets of fascism represented in characters. Like, you have Cindy the Skull that represents kind of the anarchist, like the anarchy sort of stuff behind communism and whatnot. And then you have other characters like Manana, who's kind of like the more down-to-earth, sort of chilled, sort of like communist of like, so like, I think, I deserve a fair share of things. And then you get Everard, who's like using socialism as a means to like seek power and stuff. And then there's all these.
My personal favorite are from the Vision Quest, the reading group, because they represent a lot of communists that I met in university.
Oh man, there is so much to unpack with those two, man. It's incredible. And I just like, welcome to the revolution, the revolutionary reading group, and you're like, this is a fucking reading group.
So when the
more
update
grandiose
came out,
terms,
this was the Vision Quest I
proletariat
did
and
on
the
my
bourgeoisie,
second
a
playthrough.
grand
I
narrative to
thoroughly
explain the
loved
course
it.
of human
Just
history
going
since
through
the
it was
founding of
incredible.
civilization.
It was
There
amazing.
is then the ultimate aim of the
man.
working class, the proletariat.
I love just the dialogue of being a communist at Disco. It's so fucking hilarious. Like, were you actually like a proper communist in one of your playthroughs?
Yeah.
Did you
Yeah, on the second one, yes.
Yeah.
On the first one, I was a free-thinking ultra-liberalist.
Mm.
But on both of them, and just this is purely an aside, but in both of them, at the end game dialogue, when Kim is talking about whatever choices you made, for both, he's just like, oh yeah, he's this living contradiction, like being a free hustler, but also doing everything for people. And I'm like, I didn't choose that many dialogue options. The opposite ideology. But yeah, the second one was pure communism and just doing every dialogue choice I could.
And it like the game rewards you for like being like super lefty with like even this bit on the screen it says like bad words, what bourgeois mentality to deem certain working class words bad. It's just so hyper like proletariat. It's just it warms the heart and it just makes you laugh out loud because it's like,
yeah, it's just taken to the extreme.
Yeah.
Like the most extreme like aspect you could think of.
Like there's even a bit where like do you remember the book lady outside the bookshop that you can get a quest for? So if you're a communist, did you have that interaction where like you can go up to her and hug her? And she goes, why are you hugging me? And she goes, and you go, a hug a day keeps the bourgeoisie away.
Yep. Because you can hug her. It's just the dialogue. I think you could also make some comment about like the fact that she has her kids standing out the door. And I think that there's another communist dialogue option for it. I just don't remember offhand.
I remember the ultra liberal one, which is like, oh yes, you're learning the value of good hard work. I'm like, she's
Hard work,
8 years
yeah.
old.
But that's
creating its own government, or in Masovian terms, a dictatorship of the
I mean, yeah,
proletariat.
you know, kids,
to
they have to
control
start
the
working at a
relation
young
between its
age,
labor
probably 7
and
or 8. That way,
produce,
they can
as
pull
well
their
as
hands out of the
adhering to
machinery if
plan
it gets
economic
caught.
policies to privatize the economy.
They can fit in chimneys much easier at that size, because, you know, once you hit 12, there goes your working life doing that. You're going to need that midlife career change.
And I love the initial thing where it's like, hey, psst, word is on the street is that you're building communism and you accept, and like near the end of it, and I love the take of this bit in particular on the screen where it says like, oh yeah, get the firing squads ready. And you're like, wait, what? Firing squads? You're like, yeah, man, this is what communism is about. Yeah, it was funny because that's what like. Sorry.
Go on.
You
finish that.
Oh.
Okay, I was gonna say on the flip side of that was the dialogue from the memory bank. I can't remember, but yeah, we've only built like 0.001% of communism, because like the complete opposite argument or the complete opposite side of the firing squads. Yeah, it's like no, like true communism, we've never gotten that before.
Yeah.
Just like the contradictory outlooks and just like the interpretations of communism and just how you have every single aspect represented.
Exactly. Like we have like the violent nature of it. We have like the absurd nature of it. Like people think communists are deluded and stuff of thinking certain ways. Like that's done when like there's a bit I did leave out where like there's a whole a whole bit where Harry goes, I think I might be Krasmazov. And Kim's like, you're not Krasmazov. He's like, but I have the same facial hair as him. And you're like, you're not Krasmazov.
You let that in. There's a couple lines talking about that delusion, but I love that section because all he does is look at a statue. It's like, yeah, that's me.
That's me.
Such as Krasmazov and Ignis Nielsen.
And like, I remember this entered the subreddit some time ago, where like they quoted this bit of like Joyce Messier talking about how like oh yeah, like the plague caused a revolution basically, and people were like, oh no.
In Grad, around the turn of the century, there was an outbreak of a virulent prion disease known as Zarath. This led to the ruling governments being unable to contain its spread, leading to widespread civil unrest, allowing a man like Krasmazov to step up and give the people hope and end the pandemic. For Revachol, however, the main spark for the revolution was the mismanagement of the economy by the monarchy. This led to fighting between the emerging communists and the loyalists of the suzerain. The Commune of Revachol was founded after the dissolving of the suzerain. As we've discussed in the moralist section of this video, we know that roughly 6 years later, after its founding, the coalition invaded Revachol in Operation Deathblow.
Now, I don't know who I've discussed this with. It was either with Sam or yourself, Shella, about the whole thing. How like this is there's multiple parallels to this. You can use that as the Paris Paris Commune, where like Paris momentarily had an actual commune, and then then everyone allied and came in and destroyed it. Like literally, like weeks later, I think it was. So that's a very, very close parallel to like real world history and all that sort of stuff.
Coalition hunted communists for at
I
least
always
a decade.
felt that
Even some of the more
Revachol in particular was just like 19th century France, or at least that's the kind of takeaway I got from it. Because we're talking about this monarchy that was overthrown, this mismanaged monarchy during this like, and even like the architecture and the statues kind of speak that like kind of 19th century sensibility that created this like fledgling republic that was then overseen by like military occupation, and then you throw in a little and fascism in there to spice things up, and it just kind of felt like this alternate reality Paris in a lot of ways.
Well, I mean, maybe it could be like a bit more on the nose because like Revacholian is basically some form of French, so so you could be onto something.
Servian socioeconomics is the eponymous name for real-world Marxism, applying dialectics and materialist analysis to human history and economics. However, the thought of Merservian socioeconomics doesn't entirely stick to this. It more appeals to the cursory progression of what communism has become over time. It is a way to change your perspective, an awakening of a new consciousness. The rise
Because I think that's a big thing in how communism is portrayed in a lot of ways in Disco. Is it's not really just like, you know, it's not about like authoritative control of the state. It's not about like, you know, a lot of the main principles it's founded on. It's about how being a communist in Disco Elysium is just thinking in new ways, trying to find different ways to think about the world and stuff. That's what I walked away with it as well.
Yeah, it's also sort of like not even, I want to say kind of status quo, but it's not, because it's the ideology that you post, and even sort of the people who don't have any expressive ideologies in the game, they seem to me like they're the communists by default, because it's that ideology that appeals to the masses, that kind of appeals to the working class, and that's 90% of the people that you run into in the game. You know, the people who are striking, the people who don't want any scabs to come in and start working at the factories, and you're generally like your quest giver, like even your quest givers for the most part are those downtrodden common people. And so that just kind of becomes that ideology that everyone gravitates to, and I think that's why it's also in some ways like the most diverse, because you're just interacting with so many different parts of them.
So I think what we'll do is we'll try and wrap up the communist bit so we have at least like a few more minutes to have concluding thoughts and stuff.
discover where the underground communists will meet, and Manana will tell you the password to get in. And really, that's it. When you enter the meeting, you will see the two and only members of this society, Ulysses and Staban. It's not long before it's revealed, though, that these communists are a part of a revolutionary group. A revolutionary reading group. Speaking of books, reading the literature you find throughout Martinez actually becomes relevant in this quest, such as the La Fumée magazine in the dockworker's office. And most surprisingly, I played a game of Suzerainty with Kim to pass the time, and even that became relevant. There's even a bit where Harry addresses that playing a game like Suzerainty can force players to question what subjectivity means in a ludonarrative context, and reinforces the logic of colonialism, which is fucking amazing. Then it starts to getting to the main point, about Ignace Nielsen's theory of inframaterialism. Inframaterialism is the idea that having a revolutionary consciousness will actually have an
So
effect
I
on
also
your
had that
physical
dialogue
surroundings.
option during the Vision quest because I also played the board game.
Yeah, man. Like, there's even like more books you can, like, when you're going through the interview part. Like, you have like all the books you've read, you can comment on them. Jesus. There's some. Yeah, that sounds like multiple motorcycles. Crap. Anyway, so anyway, so like, yeah, you have like multiple options for like all the books you've read, and you can be like, well, you can like pontificate about them and stuff, which I found to be just absolutely perfect. Just like, because that's kind of the feeling you get from this scene in the game of like, it's just a bunch of like, you know, overhyped intellectuals just kind of like pontificating over everything possible about any culture they can grab, any media they can get their hands on, and just like really exploding it to like mean something else. Or
Yeah, it's over analysis. It's over analysis and trying to adapt art to a particular worldview.
yeah, exactly.
And that's the joke, is that and now I studied history, and so historical Marx's historiography was very much rooted in looking at that materialism in historical events and reshaping them into an interpretive struggle. You know, a peasant revolt is done because it's a class struggle against a bourgeois overlord, and I feel that you can kind of extend that application, and if you take it to like the most satirical side of it, you get exactly the dialogue for this Vision quest of just creating these pseudo-analytic over examinations of whatever subject matter you've come across.
Yeah, like you can like, although like there some video essays we find on BreadTube and stuff do have a lot of warranted sort of need for analysis. Sometimes you find things that are so niche, and it's like a Marxist analysis of Barbie, and you're like,
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. It's just,
Like,
yeah.
whoa! Like, I mean, like, it might be really interesting, like, super interesting to read, but to watch and stuff. But I'm like,
but sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
or like blue curtains are blue curtains, that sort of thing, you know. Yeah, but this is obviously a piss take on that sort of thing. This bit of the
Exactly.
game, yeah.
Exactly, and that's why I love
This
it
reminded
so
me of
much.
a philosophy known as epistemological materialism.
That's in
a
that book
bit
I
of the
showed earlier.
psychological phenomenon.
Oh, so that's the Humankind book. So this isn't like strictly like a lefty book or anything like that. This is actually just Rutger Bregman talking about like history, sociology, and all that sort of stuff to describe how basically people are good. It's just the systems and infrastructure we live in actually kind of makes us prone to making shitty decisions and making certain power structures in life, and how certain power structures in our lives like can influence the way we behave towards one another. It's a really good book. I highly recommend it. He's done stuff like
The deck is stacked against us.
exactly. He's done books like Utopia for Realists and all this sort of stuff. He even kind of touches upon the idea of like communism, and I think he wildly misinterprets it because he's like, oh, it's the commons. Like communism is basically just the restoration of the commons. I'm like,
Not quite.
not quite. I mean, I get where you're coming from, but it's really not that.
No, that's just a very simplistic,
Once the interview to enter the group is over,
simplistic
you're left with some
interpretation
light
of
reading
it,
to
and
do.
it
To
completely
continue
divorces
quest,
the
you
reality
need to read the book they gave you.
experience
According
when
to
he was writing it, and
Informaterialists,
Engels too.
having a revolutionary consciousness produces a metaphysical entity known as plasm, and can influence the physiology of communists, such as robust, thick facial hair, allow communards to have sex for up to 8 hours at a time, and even improve crop yields. Yes, you heard me. Being a communist can make you a thick, bearded sex machine that can improve crop yields. Which sounds like it's something out of a Monty Python skit. If you read further, it just gets more insane. Informaterialists believe that once your revolutionary consciousness has been raised sufficiently, you can develop telepathy. And you can now build buildings that defy bourgeois physics. But this last part is interesting. This theory is based on the idea that if the financial system operates on faith, so maybe architecture can too. And when you think about it, money and financial systems do operate on a system of faith. Once you go back to talk to Steban again, there is an unexpected turn in the tone of conversation. Once you complete the rhetoric check, you're given the chance to ask, what's the point of all this? Which is a resonating piece of dialogue that echoes in all of the political vision quests, usually asked by Kim. The writers here then insert their new thesis for communism. Communism is in fact a secular theology whereby faith is invested, not in the ethereal divine, but the future of humanity. That communists are not idealists, but humanists. That the future can be better if humanity is willing to believe it can change. That someday we don't need the invisible hands of the free market.
At this point,
the
yes,
visible
yes and
hands of
no.
the state.
Are they humanists? Sure, by default, because they eliminate, they replace faith in divine with faith in humanity. True, but I don't think it's fair to say that they're not idealists because it's a system built entirely on idealism.
And even Marx like started out as an idealist. Like he a lot of like historians have been made analysis saying like he was originally an idealist. And then he was like, well, it's not really working. So he switched to being a materialist, and that's when he actually formed the main body of his philosophy.
Well, you could still be a materialist and an idealist. And his historical materialism is directly influenced from his time studying under Hegel. But if you read any communist revolutionary or any kind of communist intellectual, they're all ideal. They're
True.
all sort of espousing a system that completely rights the ills of the current system that we exist in. You know, from Mao to Gramsci, like they all approach the problems that we face and offer solutions for it. Some practical, some not so much, but that is the MO of communist ideology, is that entrenchment of the ideal and that faith in the ideal. And that sort of makes it a practice of exercising faith.
Yeah, it's true. I can see that, yeah. I think in terms of what I was saying, it was more or less trying to divorce the idea of like like kind of this is kind of where I like really do editorialize this part of it, where I say stuff like we've gotten ourselves into this shit, we got to find a way to get out and all this sort of stuff. So I'm really bringing some stuff of like a lot of people look at like Marxism, communism, socialism, whatever want to like any left sort of movement you can think of, and they just go, oh, you're just a bunch of blind idealists, when it's like, well, it's not just the ideal we cling towards, it's also just stuff like, you know, we look to stuff like, you know, a humanist aspect of things, of being like, you know, it's about trying to make everyone have a, not just an egalitarian society or whatever, but also just stuff like, you know, having more than just the ideal, but exploring beyond that is what I'm trying to allude to. So like,
yeah,
seeing...
sure, but you're putting faith in humanity in the sense that you believe that humans are capable of overcoming any sort of flaws that they have and to create such a system in the first place.
Exactly. So that's really why I said that.
Have that. Yeah.
But I get where you're coming from.
To have that as a lefty. Sorry, I don't mean to keep talking over you.
No, it's cool, man. It's totally cool. We're on delay and everything like that, so it's bound to happen.
Look, internet. We're talking to each other from like two different continents through the power of the internet. Like, this by itself is a feat that, you know, very few people would have even imagined a century.
Exactly.
You might start looking for ways to get out of it. As faith in God and state further recede into the pale of history, perhaps it only makes sense to replace it with a faith in humanity. It only asks that we believe that humanity has a chance to get ourselves out of the shit we've put ourselves in. Communists see that the world is broken, but not irreparable. Communism isn't about putting the bourgeoisie up against the wall, not about the proletariat achieving its epic destiny. It's about hope and believing humanity can be better. Staban says, in dark times, should the stars also go out? In dark times, all we have is hope, because it's all we have left after everything is gone.
So I think that will pretty much be like us just looking at the video and whatnot, because then it's just a conclusion after this where I kind of make very loose connections to Zizek and be like, you know, ideology is kind of something that's manufactured and stuff like this and blah, 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 blah. So...
Well, before you go to that, I do want to bring up one thing about the Vision Quest, and I thought that this was a good summation of what you just talked about visually. So you know the segment at the end when you unlock the dialogue options and then try to build that inverse bridge with the building blocks? You know what I'm talking about?
I'm not too sure. Could you repeat that?
So yeah, during that Vision Quest, there's those building blocks, and at some point, once you pass all the dialogue checks, you try to build the structure, and basically it's this inverse arch that, for all intents and purposes, physically cannot exist because there's just too much gravity. There's no support for it, and it falls apart. And so that end goal for the reading group would be to build that structure. And so you build it, and there's, for a brief moment, it looks like it's actually going to hold. It's actually going to work, and then the blocks collapse on each other. One, just sort of debunking that whole theory that, you know, communists can manipulate the very physics around them, enough belief in materialism, but also just kind of an emphasis of the point of failure, and just how failure breeds into the ideology in the way it's presented in Disco.
Yeah.
And so I thought, like, as much as that kind of leaves you with that reinforcement that it's a failed ideology in the way it's presented in the game, it's this kind of bittersweet moment that just punctuates everything you've gone through with the reading group and discussing idealism and trying to understand, you know, what makes the communist a communist. It was a nice little moment.
Yeah, because like that whole building thing, the building metaphor, like obviously that's framed in the bit where you know defy bourgeois physics sort of deal, where it's like you can literally think outside of the framework of a dominant capitalist ideology to somehow find a way to like build something else. So there's this idea, and it's, again, as we've discussed a few times, even in the pre-show, just like very Zizekian, like he's always talking about finding a way around the way that we think to try and, you know, find a way to get out of the situation that we're in. Because, like, you know, obviously he makes doing the typical Zizek thing of just like, you know, buying green or like buying recycled goods and all this sort of stuff is not a way to like combat what's happening. or whatever, like, you know, or like making your own business that sells less exploited goods and stuff like this. It's not the way out. And you know, it is that going around the situation, going around the dominant thing that exists. I think even like I've heard this from a mate of mine, but I'm pretty sure even like people from Chapo Trap House actually do voices in Disco Elysium. I don't know if that's true. I haven't looked it up, but
I remember hearing about that.
They originally did, but then after some kerfuffle, they no longer are voiced. They changed the voice acting.
I thought so because because I mean I'm referencing the fact that the voices had been changed because Kuno sounds different from the original release to the Political Vision one.
I know when I was watching like a Let's Play of someone coming across the scab leader, and in that playthrough they sounded like incredibly Scottish, but in the playthrough I played, he sounded very like Americanish. I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know that Kuno had a different voice actor.
Yeah, I didn't know either that it was changed, but it probably would have been a whole thing of like bringing the voice actors back to voice so much fucking dialogue. They're probably like, yeah, we can't do that. we have jobs and other things to do. I wonder if that was the reason why that happened, or if it was some sort of other thing. But regardless, yeah, that the point I was trying to make is like, you know, obviously, like Chapo Trap House are big supporters of Zizek because they have Zizek guest star on it like at least once a year or something. So
yeah, they're fans of his particular brand of no, not cultural Marxism. That's a boogeyman. That's not what I'm trying to say. Critical theory. That's what I'm trying to say. They're fans of his critical theory.
Yeah, because I find that yeah.
Also, I just sent you a tab. It's from the Disco Wiki. It's just that last section I was talking about, building the tower, the block tower with them.
Okay, I have it on the other screen, so.
Yeah, so basically you just have to say enough communist things during your playthrough. So if you say at least 30 of them, then you can successfully build a tower with them.
Yeah, I
So
didn't
you
get
need
that.
the
Yeah.
interfacing check. Yeah, and then that's where it's like, you know, it's almost there. You can do it, but then it collapses.
Which is a big thing for even like from the get-go, it talks about stuff like, you know, where it's like, how will I know if I meet a communist? It's like, failure. They smell like failure. It's just like, fuck. It was so like, it was peak absurdity for like all the stuff they did in the communist thing, like the reading group, the fact that they refer to like what do they call them, like iconoclasts or whatever they call them, and it's like they're pretty much just depressed. Yeah, they call them like the people who are obsessed with counting beans, and they go, oh, they're just pretty much depressed liberals. I'm like, is this a reference to like academic Marxists?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Oh man, it was hilarious.
Because you're never communist enough for some people.
Yeah, and also when you accept the communist ideology, like the quest, it goes like, there's nothing more. The most peak thing of being a communist is arguing with other communists. I'm like, yep. That's that sectarianism happening right there.
Yep.
Oh, it's brilliant stuff.
The people's front or the Judean People's Front. We're the People's Front of Judea.
Man, like, fucking Monty Python was like so ahead of its time. It was brilliant shit. But that's why I say Monty Python in that bit, because a lot of the absurdity and a lot of the tongue-in-cheek commentary really reminded me of like Life of Brian stuff they were saying, like, I'm not the Messiah. It's like, you are the Messiah, and all this sort of stuff, you know.
You can tell like I don't know if it's a direct influence, but this does feel very Monty Python-esque in its presentation in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Not quite as silly, but definitely with the same kind of thought process put into it.
Yeah. And apparently, like, I was talking to a mate of mine about Disco Elysium who finally got the chance to play it. Because, you know, it's a meme now where, like, if you play Disco Elysium, you have to tell someone else to play Disco Elysium. And I was talking to him about it, and he was like, you know, this whole story just reminds me of Night Watch by Terry Pratchett. I'm like, What? He's like, yeah, Terry Pratchett wrote a story about an amnesiac alcoholic cop who had to save the city because of a murder case. I'm like, so they've also read Terry Pratchett, maybe?
Maybe.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting bit. I didn't know that.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's actually on my reading list to do. Like, I'm now stuck between like 3 different books I'm reading. I'm reading Time of Contempt again, the Witcher book.
Okay.
I'm reading this one here, People's Guide to Capitalism. So that's kind of cool. And then I'm also reading Timothy Hickson's book. You know, Hello Future Me?
No, I don't know it.
He's a big world builder writer sort of guy. He does like videos on like breaking down. He's a big fan of Avatar. Like he'll just he's like, so in world building you need to do this like an Avatar. But like, to be fair, it seems like Avatar is pretty well established as a good example of like excellent world building and stuff. So I can't blame him. Even though I've only watched like maybe half of the first season, so.
I've only heard good things about it, and I have been told to watch it. But like all things, I'm pretty slow with picking up new shows. So, but I mean, like I haven't heard a bad thing said about it, to be perfectly honest. So it sounds like it's good.
Yeah.
But obviously, if you can make the comparisons to it, go for it.
Yeah, exactly right. So yeah, like we'll just begin the stages of wrapping up, so to speak. No, we don't have to say goodbye yet or anything, but like. Sam or Charlie, you can talk about your opinions of Disco Elysium and what you've walked away with it from, and what walked away from it with, and all that sort of stuff, if you wish.
I've been dominating a lot of this discussion, so I'm going to leave the floor open to Sam if he wish to pop in there.
So I haven't actually finished Disco Elysium. I wanted to like start a week ago to finish a game, but I got hit with side effects from COVID. But not COVID, the vaccine.
Oh, vaccine.
So yeah, I just got better like 4 days ago. So I started trying to finish the game by then, and I'm only on day 3, so I am woefully behind. But I do really like how the game is just like has a very like surreal approach to all the ideologies, but also like yet they're grounded. I mean, I quite liked how like fascism was introduced through like a gut feeling, and therefore you're talking to your like it's like I think it was like it mentioned how like it's coming from your intestines. That's why you feel like, you know, like, oh, women should be in the kitchen and all that stuff. Not much to add because I'm still in a work in progress. But yeah.
But you appreciate the game and stuff. That's why I invited you on, because like, you know, obviously we've discussed other things around like, you know, ideology and whatnot and politics and stuff. So I feel like it like once you complete the game and stuff, you would really enjoy it. Like luckily, like I don't think we've really discussed like the main investigation itself. So in terms of spoilers for that, luckily nothing's really been touched upon. So yeah, you'll still have a good time with that, I reckon.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna make a joke. I was watching a Let's Play, and the person was surprised that the game was like political and that she wasn't expecting it.
Oh wow, yeah, that would be kind of a rude sort of awakening. Like, wait a minute, is this talking about politics?
I think then like that's actually a good segue into what I liked about it. Was just well, for one, as an RPG, it's fantastic because I haven't really played any other RPG like this before, and I think the whole idea of one, talking to your individual skills and using them to guide you is a brilliant means of creating gameplay hooks. And the fact that even failure is not outright failure.
Yeah.
Failing the karaoke check is much more interesting than actually passing it.
Yeah.
It's much more interesting. And the fact that if you fail checks, you don't miss anything out of it per se, you just get different information, unless they're role specific progress. And then the thought process and all that, the conceptualizations, they're all as a game, it is such a neat system to interface with.
Yeah.
But I also really like the way that they added politics to it or approached political ideology. It's not just like a slapdash kind of lazy wink to the camera, but it's actually filled with care and showing you multiple sides of it, facets of it, and how different people interpret, sort of like in real life. And so I think just the strength of its writing is just absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
It's just
Wonder
so
what-
good.
You were saying, Sam?
I was just wondering what game, like prior to Disco Elysium, what was like the go-to game to say, hey, games can do politics.
Oh, it's not even so much that for me. I don't know, probably Metal Gear, I think, to a point, when you're talking about military conspiracies and anti-nuclear proliferation, remnants of the Cold War and how that affects complex, talking about ideology and creating your sort of reality and not putting so much stock into what's being told to you. Those are all neat aspects of that franchise.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know. I just more often than not, when you see real world politics in games, it's usually a caricature, or it's usually short, letting the writer sort of pontificate their own or editorialize.
Yeah.
And that kind of strikes me as lazy a lot of times. Not always, but a lot of times.
Yeah. Oh, so one thing I
I'm
wanted to add for
generalizing.
you, Charlotte, is that they recently had a game jam for Vampire the Masquerade, like to see who can make a game in like a short amount of time for Vampire Masquerade, and a Disco Elysium style won the competition.
Oh man, that would be dope.
Yeah, like I saw
think
some
that a
screenshots
Disco
of him,
Elysium
like
style game would work for it.
it would work.
that
It would
kind of
actually
person.
work. Like, we've been in development hell for this the Masquerade 2 for like 4 years or something now. Like,
Bloodlines 2, yeah, that's gonna be dead on arrival, man.
I reckon. So like, it's just like it does feel a bit cheap to be like, I'll make a Disco Elysium of this. Like, even Broken Roads, the game that's probably gonna be my next video, is when I played Broken Roads and go through it. Is like a lot of publishers went to the developers of Broken Roads that are actually here in Melbourne, well, Torquay, but they're still in Victoria, and they went to them and like, look, scrub the combat. We just want a Disco Elysium game. And the developers were like, no, like, we're making a Fallout style game set in the Western Australian outback. So that's our vision. We're not going to sell it just so we can be another Disco Elysium clone. But in addition to that, like, Disco Elysium has brought definitely new tools for narratives in RPGs. Like, you got the thought cabinet, you got the interactive skills, you've got the contextual nature of a lot of the dialogue. Like, a lot of the dialogue in Disco Elysium and stuff is not directive, it's contextual. It just tells you more about the world, and that's why you feel so immersed. Like, a lot of modern...
That's exactly what I was kind of referring to about, even if you don't get the full info, you just get different information, right? You don't know everything, but you know a particular aspect of it. Or if you can't pass a particular role, you don't feel cheated out of it, per se. And the game is also really generous with letting you try out skill checks. Not super generous, but they have a way to let you retry certain skill checks if you fail them.
Exactly, yeah.
For the most part.
So I think that's a good place to end it on. So, all you got, Sam, plug your stuff. Like, what video have you released recently?
Oh, so I make like video thought pieces on like so far Star Wars games, but I do want to branch out. But it's just Sam Blips on YouTube.
You're also on Twitter,
The
aren't
next video, yeah, except I need to like, it's kind of, I don't really tweet there much, mostly just liking and retweeting. But yeah, I do plan on branching out, and the next video I plan on making is like playing Half-Life 2 for the first time. Yeah, I haven't played that actually. I've only played Ravenholm, the demo.
you? Oh,
So
that sounds exciting.
Experience. Have you played the first Half-Life?
some of it, but it doesn't seem to really gel well, like visually. Yeah.
Fair enough.
I think also most people have played Half-Life 2 instead. I think that's like way more, like, well, quote unquote, more fresh in people's minds.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely the more popular of the two, generally speaking.
And Charlotte,
But
yourself,
yeah,
plugs, recent videos?
I will get to me in a second, but I just want to say one other thing
Mm-hmm.
for Sam. If you're having a hard time getting into Half-Life because of the visuals, then I highly recommend, because
I've
that
based it.
will, yeah. So it's basically a remake of Half-Life using visuals,
But
more
they
approachable.
changed things.
Very few things.
It's not a true representation of the original art.
Yeah, that's fair to a point, but it's a recommendation. As for me, yeah, I'm Cult of the Cyber Skull. As you can see on YouTube, you can find me under that name. I'm also on Twitter, probably more active than I should be because it's Twitter. I just do game reviews, editorials on whatever strikes me fancy. I have a series called You Should Play, and that's an elevator pitch, me trying to convince you why you should play a particular game. Not so much a critical review like mainline series, but just more of a selling point. My last video was one of those on City, which is a phenomenal game and probably one of the best,
What game?
probably the
Sorry.
best, The Forgotten City. Um, it's a
Oh
Skyrim
yes,
mod. Yeah, the
yeah.
Skyrim mod that was spun off, and no, speaking of Australian developers, a Skyrim mod that was spun off to its own franchise, and it is so good, so good. And I'm currently wrapping up a rather meaty video essay that I'm hoping to release. I'm getting close to the finish line, but still got plenty of work to do.
Excellent. All right, guys, thanks for coming along. That'll be it for today. Yeah, and anyone who's watching this after, yep. You know, I make long video essays, basically centered around like the narratives behind a lot of games. I tend to like really devote myself to like big projects, so I'll admit I don't have the best release schedule, and currently I'm working on like writing my own novel and stuff, so like a lot of my time will be going towards that. But when a game really strikes me, I'm like, I need to talk about this. That's when I'll make a video, basically. So stay subscribed and stuff and see what happens. But thanks, Sam and Charlotte, for coming along today. And hope you're all staying safe, and I'll see you all later.
Right,
Thank you for
see ya.
having us on.
Thanks.
Take
Bye.
care.
All right.